Well, good morning, people. My name is Dr. George Sparks. I'm the host for Bible Interact, Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Today, I got with me a special guest, Mr. Thomas Winder, all the way back from Israel. He made it out just in time. Now he's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He just finished a tour around different churches and is talking about his evangelical uh, experiences and his hunt for the location of the Mount of the Transfiguration. He started around Caesarea Philippi, which is more like at the base of Mount Hermon, north in Israel, and he moved up to the Druze village. This is where he has his ministry based in Israel, but he's at the location now, as you can see behind me, if you're not familiar with it, is called Nimrod's Castle. And he's in that vicinity of Nimrod's Castle on Mount Hermon, where he's going to explain to us his theory, his belief of where the Transfiguration took place.
Where did the Transfiguration take place? And why? Why is it important to know exactly where it took place? In fact, Jesus takes them to the goat demon Pan's altar, where the gate to hell happens to be, where the fallen angels came to earth to mate with the human women. Their offspring turn out to be the men of resolve, the men of renown, and they are named the giants of the Bible, the Nephilim. Jesus comes to Mount Hermon, where the giants were born. They were literally born on this hill. Now, who is the first born of the giants? The number one pagan god of the pagan pantheon? Well, that would be Baal. So where would Baal's throne be? And how dynamic is that? That God, the creator of the universe, would choose ordinary sinners to combat the very chief of sin. Jesus comes to Mount Hermon was to teach his disciples and to declare his church made out of sinners. Years ago, I found a problem with the story of the Transfiguration in the New Testament. That's Matthew 17, Luke chapter 9, and Mark chapter 9. The problem is the location. The story revolves around Jesus coming to Mount Hermon. And really, you need to understand why Jesus came to Mount Hermon in the first place. Otherwise, you never understand the real story behind the story. What is on Mount Hermon that is so important that Jesus and his disciples would walk some 50 miles north of the Sea of Galilee to come here? What is so important about Mount Hermon? Jesus comes north from Capernaum after feeding 4,000 people and his disciples cannot cast out demons. They're worried about where lunch is coming from the next day. So they get all the way up here, and because Peter in Matthew chapter 17 wants to build 3 Sukkots, one for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, we automatically know that tells us that they're here on Mount Hermon for the Feast of Tabernacles, which means they're not in Jerusalem where they're supposed to be. In fact, Jesus takes them to the goat demon Pan's altar, where the gate to hell happens to be, the pit to the underworld, where sacrifices took place, public orgy took place, all the debauchery you can even imagine in your mind took place right down the hill from us at Banyas. So they get to Caesarea Philippi on perhaps the first day, of Tabernacles, and they set up their Sukkots down there in Banias. And there Jesus declares his church after he asks the big question, which is a question we all need to answer to ourselves. And the question is,
but whom say ye that I am?
now Peter gets it right. He answers, and he said,
Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God.
Jesus then replies and says, yes, that's correct. Flesh and blood couldn't have told you that, only my Father in heaven. And he gives Peter a promotion by calling him Simon Bar Jonah. Now all of a sudden Peter, the uneducated fisherman, is now called the son of Jonah, the prophet Jonah. So then Jesus says, you are Petros. You have to get that right. He reintroduces Peter not as Simon Bar Jonah, son of the prophet. No. Jesus says, it's kind of like, wait a minute, you are Petros. He speaks Greek, calls him a pebble, which of course is to deflate his ego because all of a sudden he thinks he's the son of a prophet. He says, okay, Peter, you are Petros, comma, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates to hell will not prevail against it. They're literally standing at the gate to hell down at Banias, right below us. So Jesus says right after that, he says, I will give you, and that is speaking to the church, I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. When he says, upon this rock I will build my church, he's not referring to Peter individually. He's talking to the sinners of the world, because the rock that he's standing on, that the disciples and his group are there next to the gate to hell, the very altar of the goat demon Pan, that rock represents the sinners of the world. That's literally the gateway to hell down there. So the rock is all of us that are believers in Jesus. We are the rock because we have the authority to go against the evil forces of this world. And how dynamic is that? That God, the creator of the universe, would choose ordinary sinners to combat the very chief of sin. That's extraordinary to me. But of course, we are redeemed sinners. We have been washed. We have been cleansed. We have been set free. We have been forgiven. We have been anointed and saved. And now, of course, we are given the authority. And then on the last day, because it says after the 6th day, which means the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, they walk up the hill. So Jesus comes to Mount Hermon to basically reclaim the mountain for the kingdom of God. Because after all, this mountain is where the Nephilim were born. This is where the bad angels came to planet Earth to try to thwart God's plan of redemption. So Jesus first, he goes to the altar of the goat demon Pan down the hill at Banias. So theologically speaking, then Jesus goes from the goat demon Pan's altar right up the hill to this very spot, which turns out to be Baal's own throne. Baal is the number one fertility god of the pagan world. He's the top dog. He's the firstborn of the Nephilim. He's in charge of all the other giants. He basically is the devil incarnate. Well, it turns out, after I spent many months walking all the hills, going to the high places around Mount Hermon, and I found the similarities in every single temple site. They all had niches cut into the stones, standing stones, by the way, for statues of the pagan fertility gods. They all have these military defensive walls built out of stone that signify that there's something special going on the hilltop. They're all, by the way, on high places where springs happen to be, and they cut out of the ground the spring. They line it with rocks so that they have a pool of water, not just to drink out of, but to the pagan world, those pits that are common in all the other cultic temple sites, including Baal's throne, they are the opening or the doorway to the underworld. What is a pit? First, you have to have water, because springs coming up from underground would be the doorway to the underworld. And what you do with a spring, we even do it to this day, is you simply dig it out and line it with stones. Here's an old pit right here at the base of the towers. This would have been full of water back in the old days. Of course, they've tapped into the water source when the fortress was built by the Islamic folks that had kicked out the Christians and were guarding the Damascus road to keep everybody out. What they did was they tapped to the water source that used to come up to the top of this hill, and they tapped into those pits or springs, and they built a swimming pool, which has still got water in it to this day, which is proof beyond proof that there is water on the top of this hill. It's not all rain collected cistern water. No, there actually is a spring. If you come up here after 10 years of no rain and solid drought, that pool will still have water in it, because there's spring water coming up, which used to feed these pits, which happen to be at every single cultic temple site all the way around Mount Hermon. We are in the pagan zone. Now, if you pan around here, you'll see these megalithic stones that used to be part of a big, huge archway, which basically is a door to Baal's throne. We're down in the cistern, or the pool, that's below those pits where the water used to go up to 2,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, when they built this fortress, they tapped into the springs and they made a cistern. They made many cisterns on this mountain to collect rainwater, but this cistern in particular is fed by the spring that used to feed those pits. And it's easy to see if you're here at the right time and the sun is just right, you'll literally see bubbles coming up in the middle of this area and the moss spreading out because the water is coming up. Same place, by the way, little addition, same place Paul, or Saul at that time, was blinded on the road to Damascus and met Jesus face to face and changed his life right here. Okay, so now we're on the back side of the gate. Of course, this gate has been expanded by the Islamics when they built the fortress all the way around this mountain. But before that, which was only 1,000 years ago, there was nothing on this hill except for these two big towers and a huge archway right here. And we saw quite a few of the stones that had been falling off on the downhill slope. Here is the end of this left tower. And of course, this is the addition onto it next. And then you also have these stairs that come up towards this little niche in the rock, which the stairs that are missing here would have kept going right into the top of this side of the tower. Now, as the camera pans to the right, you'll see the end of this tower, and because it's the big rocks stopping and the small rocks starting. So the Islamics filled in the middle between the two towers and made their own doorway. But on the other side of this doorway, you'll see more stairs. You'll see more stairs going up. And you'll see the exact same niche and megalithic stones on that side as you do on this side. So the stairs over there that are blocked off go to the same, there's basically to the tower on the right. These stairs go to the tower on the left. And there used to be this huge archway built out of those dolomite stones that we saw on the other side. That's the only thing that was here when Jesus and his disciples came to this mountain, except for a small temple right behind us, which we're going to go to right now.
I'm literally standing where the three disciples and Jesus, Moses and Elijah would have been sitting or standing through the night when the big cloud of light comes down. I just call it the light show. But all around us are the remains of what used to be a rooftop right here around these standing stones. And what I'm pointing at, the backside of this particular standing stone, is literally, and we'll go on the other side in a minute, but this stone is a chair that's been cut out for a giant, as in the very throne of Baal himself.
You'll find out in Luke chapter 9 that they spent the night up here on this hill and didn't come down the hill until the next morning when a big crowd of people were waiting for him to ask what happened, what's going on. Well, they saw, and it's easy to say this, they must have seen the light show. Because from the top of this hill, where Baal's throne used to be, before Nimrod's fortress was built, okay, from the top of this hill, literally everybody from Tel Dan, Caesarea Philippi, and all around this hill saw the light show, because it happened at night on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, if you're Jewish, that should ring a bell, because on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, every year in Jerusalem, they put on a big light show themselves, trying to commemorate the Shekinah glory, the pillar of fire that they had in the wilderness that guided them around. So they put a bunch of wood on the altar, they light the big lamps, and they try to emulate the light show. Watch this. At the exact same time the light show is being put on in Jerusalem, Jesus is here on this mountaintop, of course after dark, during the night, and he puts on the light show. And a voice comes into that cloud of light and says, actually answering his own question. Remember the question? Who do you say that I am? Listen to what God says in the cloud, in the glory, where Moses, Jesus, and Elijah are actually talking about his departure from Jerusalem, which means the crucifixion, the very story these disciples hate the most to hear. But that's what they're talking about. And God says, he answers his own question, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And he adds a caveat, "Listen to him," with the exclamation point. It's basically a command to anybody and everybody that could have heard the voice. And it's a stipulation that maybe not only did everybody see the light, but they might have also heard the voice of God, just like at Mount Sinai when Moses was given the 10 Commandments. And everybody heard the voice of God from Mount Sinai. That's total speculation. And it's remarkable because it all happened right here, not 60 miles south on Mount Tabor. Remember, it's the Feast of Tabernacles. They're set up here for basically 7 days. They can't take a 60-mile walk and come back the very next morning. It is virtually impossible.
the geography, the topography of the land, with ridges on both sides of this particular mountaintop, tells the whole story. But when you get into the spiritual aspect, it nails it. Because what would be better for the creator of the universe to do than first start at the goat demon Pan's altar, where all that debauchery and lasciviousness is taking place, and then from there go right straight to the top dog's altar, Baal's own altar himself, to answer the very question, who do you say that I am? And of course, we all need to answer that question. Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, is indeed the Messiah, the Son of the living God.